In this video, we are going to talk about the image quality and performance of the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 DG/DN art lens. Kia ora, good morning everyone, welcome back to the channel, Richard Wong here. Today we are going to have a look at the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 DG/DN art lens. I have to say the full name because Sigma has made quite a number of 24-70 f2.8 lens over the years. So this is the latest one, and this one is specially designed for the full frame mirrorless cameras. There are two different versions available. One is for the Sony E mount, which is the one that I'm looking at right now. But they have also released another version for the L mount because Sigma is one of the key members of the L mount alliance. Before we start, I have to say one thing that makes this Sigma lens very attractive is its price. The price here in New Zealand, I think it's just under 2,000 New Zealand dollar, or if you guys from US, then the price is I think just a little bit over 1,000 US dollar. So that is pretty much half price of the other first party 24-70 f2.8 lens. For example, the Sony G Master 24-70 2.8 is pretty much double the price of this Sigma lens. So we have to see if there is a reason why this lens is so much cheaper. But if you hold it in the hand, the build quality, the first impression is that it is definitely fantastic. I always love the Sigma lens design. It looks very nice, very modern. Compared to if you have been around taking photos for a while, you may remember just not that many years ago, before Sigma released the art lenses, the older Sigma lens design were like nowhere as good as what the new Sigma art lens is like. Like this one looks very premium, and if you hold it in your hand, it feels very solid. Things like the focus ring or the zoom ring, they all feel very nice. There are a couple of buttons and switches here on the side here. So we have the AF/MF switch here for you to switch between the autofocus or magnifocus mode. You have an additional programmable button here, so you can customize it to your favorite feature. But for myself, I don't really use the button on the lens too much because I just prefer to use the buttons on the camera so that I can get used to the same button and then use it with every single lens that I use with the camera. And there is a lock switch at the bottom so that you can lock the lens at the 24mm. But surprisingly, for this lens, I don't know whether there's a problem with this lens or not. When I lock it, and I can actually, if I apply a bit of force, I can actually unlock the lens. I haven't heard anyone talk about it, so if you also have one of these lenses, can you let me know whether it is normal or not that I can lock it, but I can also unlock it by easily just turning the zoom ring on the lens. The front filter thread is 82mm, which is now seems to be the normal size for the Pro zoom lens. A couple of years ago, it was still 77mm, but over the last few years, it seems like everyone has been increasing the size, or at least the front filter thread on the lens. So 82mm seems to be the standard filter size for the Pro zoom lenses. The lens is weather sealed. You can see that there is a rubber gasket at the end here, around the edges here. But according to Sigma, there are multiple rubber seal around the lens to protect it from weather. So it should be okay if you use it to take photo under rain or even snow. But right now, because here in New Zealand, we are having a nationwide lockdown, so I couldn't really go out and test the lens under different weather conditions. Another thing you may need to be aware of is that the lens does not have any optical image stabilizer built into the lens. That's mostly because most of the latest Sony cameras, or even the L-mount cameras, most of the latest L-mount cameras, they all have in-body image stabilizer. So you could just use the in-body image stabilizer to provide you the stabilization feature. If you have one of the older Sony camera that doesn't have it, unfortunately that means there is no image stabilization. When I was browsing Sigma's website, I noticed that Sigma only mentioned this lens uses a stepping motor and is compatible with the eye autofocus feature, but other than that, it didn't really say too much about its autofocus feature, and that makes me worry a little bit because I was thinking, does that means the lens autofocus performance is actually not that good? Turns out my worries were really unfounded. The autofocus performance of this lens in real life is very good. The autofocus speed is very fast, and also the operation is very smooth and very quiet. If you are shooting with this lens outdoor, I think you would not be able to hear any autofocus noise from this lens at all. Even when you are shooting indoor, you can only barely hear the autofocus noise if you put your ear very close to the camera. And when shooting video in continuous autofocus mode, the lens can also follow the target very quickly and also very smoothly. Combine it with the virtual silent autofocus operation that make this lens a very good lens if you want to shoot video with autofocus. And because of that, I have also tested the lens to see if there is much focus breathing, and surprisingly there is very minimal amount of focus breathing. At some certain focal length, the focus breathing is almost non-noticeable. I've also done some tests to see if this lens is parfocal or not. While I cannot say this is 100% a parfocal lens, but from what I see, changing the focal length doesn't seem to have any effect on the focus. In terms of the image sharpness, at 24mm focal length, if you look at the center, even at the maximum aperture f2.8, the center sharpness is already excellent. Stop down to f4 would just marginally improve the center sharpness because at f2.8 it was already very good. Now if we look at the corner, at f2.8 it is definitely a little bit soft. Stop down to f4 would become a little bit sharper, but even stop down further to f5.6, the corner sharpness is still not quite the same as the center sharpness at 24mm focal length. At 50mm focal length, the center sharpness is once again excellent at the maximum aperture f2.8. Look at the corner at f2.8, it is a little bit soft, becomes sharper at f4, at f5.6 then the corner sharpness becomes very good. If you look at the samples shot at 70mm focal length, at the center at f2.8, once again it is already very sharp. Stop down to f4 or f5.6, you can only get marginal improvement in terms of center sharpness. Corners at f2.8 is a little bit soft. Stop down to f5.6, then the corner become really sharp. If you stop down further, then you can only get marginal improvement in terms of corner sharpness. When I was looking at all those image sharpness test photos, which were all shot with the distortion correction turned off, I noticed this lens does have quite a bit of distortion. This seems to be the worst at the wide end, the 24mm end. There is quite a bit of barrel distortion. When I increase the focal length to the mid-range around 35 to 50mm, the distortion seems to be quite a lot better. But then if I keep on increasing the focal length to the tele end, which is around 60-70ish, then the distortion become more noticeable again, but this time we got some pincushion distortion. But of course, if you don't like to have distortion, you can always turn on the distortion correction feature on your camera. Then it will largely remove the distortion in the expense of a little bit of image sharpness. This lens has 11 round aperture braid, which is even more aperture braid than the more expensive Sony G Master. And maybe because of that, the bokeh is surprisingly good for a zoom lens. Bokeh at the maximum aperture is very round and very smooth, and I also don't really see much cat's eye effect near the corner of the photo. Even when I stop down the lens to f4 or f5.6, the bokeh from the lens is still reasonably round and smooth. Chromatic aberration is very well controlled. Even the high contrast photo I shot at the maximum aperture, I see very minimal amount of color fringing. At the wide angle end, vignetting is quite noticeable at f2.8. stop down to f4 would improve it quite a bit, but even when I stop down to f5.6, there is still a bit of vignetting that is noticeable. At 70mm at f2.8, I can still see a bit of light fall off at the corner and edges of the photo, but when I stop down to f5.6, then vignetting is almost unnoticeable. All the Sigma art lens that I have tested in the last probably 12-18 months or so, they all have fantastic lens flare control, and this Sigma 2470 f2.8 is pretty much the same. No matter when I shoot directly into bright sunlight or when I'm taking photo at night but pointing to a bright light source, there is still very minimal amount of lens flare and ghosting, and the overall contrast of the photo or the video I shot still remain very good. While this Sigma 2470 DGDN art lens is not really a macro lens, but it has pretty good close focus capability. The minimum focus distance is only 18cm at the wide end or 38cm at the teddy end. So that gives us a 1 to 2.9 maximum magnification when shooting at the wide end, or 1 to 4.5 when shooting at the teddy end. So while this is definitely not quite 1:1 macro magnification ratio, it is still very handy if you want to take some close-up photo using this Sigma lens. However, there seems to be two issues that I noticed when taking close-up photos with this lens. The first one is that when taking close-up photos, the image quality seems to drop a bit when I'm shooting near the closest focus distance. To improve that, I have to stop down the lens a little bit. If I stop down the lens to maybe f8 or so, then the image quality would improve quite a bit, which is not a big problem because when you are shooting at very close focus distance, your depth of field will become very thin. So stop down to around f8 will give you a little bit more depth of field, which is probably something you would need anyway. And the other problem I noticed is that if you want to achieve the maximum magnification ratio, you need to shoot at the wide end, and when you do that, because of the minimum focus distance only 19cm, which is measured from the sensor to the object, that means the actual distance between your target and the front of the lens is only a few centimeters. So that means quite often you would have some trouble with the lighting because your lens may be casting shadow on your subject, and if you want to use a camera flash to light up your subject, it will be quite hard because there is not much space between the front of the lens and your subject. Because of that, I find it's probably better to shoot at the telephoto end when you want to shoot some close-up photos, even if the maximum magnification is a little bit lower. This Sigma 2470 f2.8 DGDN art lens is another very solid lens from Sigma. The build quality is definitely very solid, it looks very nice, and the autofocus performance is very good for both photo and also video, and it has minimal focus breathing, seems to be parfocal, and the overall image quality is also very good. However, the distortion and vignetting are both more than what I like to see, so that would stop me from calling this a perfect lens. But while it may not be optically perfect, if you think about the price of this lens, which is like half the price of the Sony G Master 2470 f2.8 lens, this Sigma lens is definitely a much more attractive and much more cost-effective option because it provides you very similar performance, but it can save you a lot of money.